Q&A towards the end of this session, where we invite you to submit your questions via the chat box. So really, the next thing to say is welcome, panelists, and thank you very much for joining us today. Panelists, my first question to you is, in your expert opinions, and as can be seen on the slide, in your expert opinions, why is the UK government's attempted enactment of Clause 9 proving to be so controversial? And Mr. Morham, could I ask you to go first, if possible?
Sure. I mean, it's a good question, actually, because although the removal of citizenship provisions taken as a whole are pretty awful, the extent to which these proposed changes make them more awful is a modest extent, in truth. So it does really raise the question why they've grabbed public attention. And I think there are a number of reasons for that, and fundamentally they all lie in the realm of politics rather than in the realm of law. So the broader act really is egregious. There's been some extensive analysis done of the provisions and the multiple occasions on which it breaches international human rights norms by people like Raza Hussain and others. So the context in which Clause 9 arises is a very ugly context. It was dropped in to the bill at the last minute without any consultation, and sadly, we have learned to be cynical about the world and about how legislation happens. I would say, particularly under this government, and that sequencing of Clause 9, I think, caused people to wonder why it hadn't been subject to advanced consultation. The rhetoric around immigration has been very, very aggressive. So people like Fahad Ansari, who is a panelist who knows much more about this area than I do, will be well aware of the politically motivated attacks on immigration lawyers. But you've had a whole sort of series of events like that. You've also had Windrush, I think, which has caught a lot of people's attentions as well. And they collectively, I think, have caused people to be cognizant of what, sorry, my 10-year-old was just paying a short visit, have caused people to be much more thoughtful, much more interested in what really is happening with immigration. Also, of course, the Home Office discussion around Clause 9 has been very, very unhelpful to government. They've said a whole bunch of stuff about the provisions, which just isn't true. And I think that, in combination with the fact of Clause 9 having been dropped in very late, has not helped the government defend the changes made in Clause 9. And I suppose from my point of view, I'd say that the last thing is that it's been picked up by constituencies outside the normal constituencies who are interested in immigration matters. Certainly, I saw the issue floating around in the bits of Twitter that the establishment tends not to read. And regrettably, those are the bits of Twitter that are occupied by racialized groups. And I was not aware of it, but when I read it, I was pretty alarmed. I was completely ignorant of it. And I think we certainly helped with the opinion that we commissioned, that Carlos mentioned, put the issue under the noses of lots of politicians and journalists who might not otherwise have been aware of it. But I mean, there's been very good coverage in the New Statesman and in The Guardian as well. The Guardian's legal correspondent ran with the piece very early. I mean, just standing back, I don't want to give too long an answer. What strikes me as being particularly appalling about the provisions as they now stand really is that they create a class of contingent citizenship. They create a class of citizen of the United Kingdom who is not able to enjoy all of the rights that people unlikely to be caught by the provisions, fundamentally white people, enjoy. If you are considering whether to exercise your right to protest, you'll have cognizance of the extremely broad scope of these provisions, and you think, well, maybe I don't really want to have a fight with the Home Office because I'm just not sure where that fight will go. So things that would never occur to indigenous Brits, things that would never stop them enjoying the full suite of citizenship rights, will de facto operate to inhibit the exercise of citizenship rights by people who are caught within these provisions. It casts a pall over the citizenship of a large number, many millions of people in the country. And I think that point is resonating.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm sure we'd agree that was extremely insightful. Mr. Ansari, could I put the same question to you, please?
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. I'd echo a lot of what Joe has said briefly. I mean, I would add a couple of things without wanting to repeat what Joe has said. There seems to be, we're living in 2022 now, and technology and the world has moved on from what it was back in 2001 and 2 and 3 when these powers were first introduced. So there's an ability to raise a lot more awareness about what's happening and what kind of implications this legislation has for civil liberties, what kind of communities it's impacting upon. If you cast your mind back 2 decades ago when these powers were first introduced, I don't think we had Facebook or Twitter or the various forums where we have managed to collectively agitate against the proposed legislation as we have today. So it was a lot harder to actually communicate that message. Those of us who were concerned about it, it was very difficult to get your message broadcast and communicate and spread within communities. I think that's a huge aspect. Is Clause 9 is problematic, but as the debate around Clause 9 has carried momentum, it has allowed the space for people to discuss the deprivation power in itself. And what struck me was that so many people were actually unaware of what was happening. And they were unaware that deprivation has been a policy, has been a practice, and has been utilized on hundreds of occasions over the past 2 decades. People were surprised to hear, surprised is an understatement, were shocked to hear that the only route to appeal against a decision to deprive you of your citizenship was to a tribunal or a special tribunal where you didn't get to see the evidence against you. And your lawyers don't get to see the evidence against you or to hear what the specific allegations are. And furthermore, that you are deprived before your appeal has even started. So before a judge has looked at it. Now, all of these things people are finding quite shocking. And I think that chimes with the general human sense of having fair play, of having due process. I mean, anyone who's seen kids play and where an accusation is made against another child that he hit me or he took my sticker or my card, immediately they ask, well, I didn't prove it. And if they were to be penalized or punished in any way without the case being presented as to what they did, they would be very natural. It's a natural resistance against injustice. And what I feel we're seeing now is that people who, had they been aware 2 decades ago about what was happening, we would have seen that pushback at a much earlier stage. And it should also be borne in mind that 2 decades ago, when all these laws and powers were coming in 2003, 2005, 6, 7, we were at the sort of hysterical years of the war on terror. And there was a sense that, well, this is only, those who did know about it were saying, well, it's only going to be used against the likes of Abu Hamza or these Islamist extremists, and it won't affect anybody else. And there was I remember a Islamic Human Rights Commission where I was interning at the time, and also caged prisoners when they came around. Both of them were quite, they got in a lot of hot water about arguing against deprivation of people like Abu Hamza, because it was seen to be, well, you're siding with extremists, when the issue was the principle, not the personality. Because if one law is being brought in onto our statute books to affect a single individual, I mean, it doesn't leave the statute book after that person is impacted. It carries on. It's there, and the effect of that is what we're discussing today. You know, Abu Hamza was the first target of the new deprivation powers 20 years ago, but it's successfully been used against almost 500 people since then, and not all of them, probably the majority of them, are not even close to being what Abu Hamza was alleged to be. So I think this sort of Islamophobia in the wider society and within the Muslim community, it has to be said, resulted in communities and the wider British public almost taking a sense, well, it doesn't affect us, it doesn't impact us, so it doesn't matter. I think the article in New Statesman really shook a lot of people, because the figure itself, you know, millions could be impacted by it. I mean, I don't like scaremongering. I don't think it's going to, I mean, it has the potential to impact millions. Of course it does. I don't think it will be used at this stage anyway. But I think having seen Windrush, having seen what's happened, people are skeptical. There's also a suspicion, there's mistrust of the current government. And I think, again, this whole campaigning against Clause 9 sort of fed in, it naturally flowed with that sort of anti-Tory momentum that was generally in place in any sense. And I think it's very important to realize that the deprivation powers in the current format came through the new Labour government of Tony Blair. The current test of it being conducive to the public good, again, that was under the Labour government in 2006. So perhaps that's another reason people trusted the Labour government more, so there was less resistance to it. And because there's more anti-Tory sort of sentiment amongst communities, people are more willing to jump on board this time around. Just some thoughts as to why I think that it is so controversial now. I mean, the Clause 9 itself, as Joe pointed out, is a modest development in light of what we're already dealing with in terms of deprivation of citizenship.
Thank you very much, Fahad, for that thorough analysis. Dr. Rai, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to the discussions.
Yes, thank you very much. I think there are two concerns about this legislation. One, in the way it has been being brought in, with a lot of communities who feel quite apprehensive about this. I mean, it's almost like legislation brought in some of the countries that we often raise human rights about, where a legislation is sort of rushed through, although this is not rushed through. But there is no wide consultation. There isn't an attempt to take the opinions of others. And there are a lot of questions which the government is not answering, not engaging in. And this is quite a departure from what happened in the last 20, 25 years, when the government would engage with a number of stakeholders when bringing in a controversial legislation like this, take their views and then fine-tune it. So that's one of the I think what is causing a lot of concern. And secondly, I mean, there is I think it's a legitimate fear among many ethnic and Black communities that this is creating a two-tier citizenship. Whereas if you're white and you can prove that your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents were really you can trace your ancestry to here, to this country, then even if they were depriving you of citizenship when you're abroad, you'll be brought back here, and then you have the opportunity to challenge the decision in the courts. But if you say a person like myself, well, I was born in Tanzania and my parents were born in India. I don't have that luxury, so I could be I could be in a country where there's a death penalty. I could be in a country where torture is quite normal, uh, and uh, and there we are. You know, the government suddenly decides you're going to take your citizenship away. Uh, and what does an individual like me do then? By the time the police there arrest you for other reasons, or I mean, you can't really you can't from remotely from there then start organizing the legal challenge. That I think those are two very concerning issues on this clause 9. Yeah, I think that's where. So I think that's what is that's what disturbing a lot of the communities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai, and thank you very much, panelists. My next question to you is, panelists, in your expert opinions, what do you foresee as the wider implications for our state sovereignty and citizens' rights as a result of the enactment of this bill? And Mr. Fahad, owing to your previous experience, can I ask you to go first?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm not being eroded rapidly. I think everyone's fully aware of the fact that if the current legislation, even without clause 9, allows individuals to be rendered stateless. So if you come from another country, you naturalize as British, and you live your entire life in the UK, at any point they could deprive you of your citizenship and leave you stateless. So I mean, and that applies. I think I saw a question in the chat box about an Indian national. So if an Indian national was to come to the UK and naturalize as British, my understanding of Indian nationality law, which I may be wrong about, is that India prohibits dual citizenship. So the moment you naturalize, you would lose your Indian citizenship. But the fact that you could live here for decades, and then because you naturalize as a citizen, they can actually deprive you of your British citizenship on the basis that, well, you can reapply for your Indian citizenship and leave you stateless. There was a time when having multiple citizenship was seen as a benefit in life, not as a liability. And we have the scenario now where I personally know many people who have taken steps to surrender their citizenship of their parents. So I know people who have surrendered their Pakistani citizenship, which they've inherited, and they said, we'll just get visas to go visit our relatives in the future. So people are afraid. People are taking steps to lose a benefit. As I see, I think having multiple nationalities is something to aspire towards, to strive towards. I think it helps you in life. But what we're essentially being told is that, well, you don't belong anyway. And there's this, it's horrible really, because there's a sense that our communities are being told you don't belong in the UK. And because we feel we do, we're desperate to try to dig our heels and stay here. At the same time, I have personally aware of people who have in recent years just left. They have, in one case, in two cases, I know people have surrendered their UK citizenship. They said, well, we don't belong anyway. They've traveled back to Pakistan and they've from there renounced their UK citizenship. And that's a very, very strange situation to be in. And even at the time when one of my clients who wanted to do this, the Pakistani High Commission had a lot of difficulty understanding why he'd want to do it. And they said, well, he's born in the UK. His dad was born there. Why does he want to go? Why does he want a Pakistani passport and to go back? And they couldn't understand why. But my client was of the opinion, well, I don't belong here. And they are telling me time and time again, and what I see for my kids in the future is I don't see a future for them here. I want them to grow up in a place where they feel accepted, where they feel as full citizens and confident about their identity, without having to compromise different aspects of it in order to be seen as British and subscribe to quote unquote British values. So it is a scary route we're going on. The other constitutional problem I see is the manner in which the British government has and continues to repeatedly circumvent judicial findings against it when it comes to deprivation. Most recently, we've seen it with this issue with Clause 9, is a direct response to them losing a case of depriving a woman called D4, who's her anonymization in the court system, on the basis that they didn't give her sufficient notice. They didn't give her notice at all about her deprivation order. So in order to get around that finding, they've decided to introduce Clause 9, which means that we don't have to give it in future, and it will operate retrospectively, meaning that all of those cases where we didn't give notice, they will all be just deemed valid from here on in. They did this in the past with the issue of rendering people stateless on the basis that they're entitled to another nationality. They lost the case in the Supreme Court in the case of Al-Jeddah in 2014, on the back of which they brought in this legislation. They did it with Abu Hamza's case, with David Hicks's case. So it's very distasteful where a government is found to have acted unlawfully and by the highest courts in this country. And on the back of that, they just introduced legislation to make it sound like it didn't even matter. So people spend years and years, public funds are spent on these cases to get findings that the government has acted in a manner unbefitting of a government, i.e. unlawfully. And therefore they just legislate to make the unlawful lawful. This is not supposed to happen in liberal democracies. It's not the way that it's not kind of society we want to live in. It's the equivalent of the toddler just, pushing over the board or throwing all his toys out of the pram with a tantrum. So I think that is a severe problem we're having at the moment.
Thank you very much, Fahad. That was extremely thought-provoking. Joe, could I put the same question to you? But just before I do, I'd like to just tell the audience what the question is for those who have just joined us. So, Joe, in your expert opinion, what do you foresee as the wider implications for our state sovereignty and citizens' rights as a result of enactment of this bill? And the floor is yours.
A mercifully short answer from me. As we've identified, fundamentally what Clause 9 does is remove the right to have notice of the removal of your citizenship, and it removes it in circumstances going far beyond those which might be thought of as being sort of reasonably necessary. And that raises a fairly profound constitutional issue, really, because we're supposed to have the right to access justice. We're supposed to have proper appeal rights. We're supposed to have the ability to dispute the removal of citizenship rights. Citizenship rights are incredibly important, obviously. They've been described as the right to have rights by Holocaust scholars. And so the notion that you could have removed from you the vehicle through which you access rights, i.e. citizenship, without notice, is profoundly troubling, because without notice, you can't challenge, because you do not know that there is a decision affecting you that you might challenge. And I have to say, when I read the opinion that had been written by Ros Hussain QC, by Jason Pobjoy and Eleanor Mitchell, I wondered to myself whether this was one of those occasions on which so egregious was the breach of United Kingdom constitutional principles, that courts might intervene even in the face of clear legislation. I don't think we're quite in that territory, but it's very, very ugly stuff. It's not what a government that has a legitimate aim seeks to do. So it's another piece of the jigsaw, really. It's another piece of horrid mood music for those who don't enjoy all of the cultural capital that people who look and sound like I enjoy. I think that's what I find most troubling about it. I mean, obviously, living in a country that has different classes of citizenship for native and non-native citizens, a sort of clumsy shorthand, forgive me, but it articulates something about what this legislation does, is objectionable as a matter of principle, but also, and this is the point that really resonates for me, casts a pall over the life of everybody who is potentially subject to those provisions. They don't actually have to be exercised against you to curtail your enjoyment of your citizenship rights. So I think for me, it's another step in really quite a horrid direction. It's the kind of institutionalization in our statute books of a kind of cultural racism.
Thank you very much, Joe. And Dr. Rai, can I put the same question to you?
Okay. Yeah, let me answer it, the second part of it first, and then this first part second. As director of Sikh Human Rights Group, I was involved in the campaign to stop Harjeet Singh Chahal's deportation in the 1990s. I think many of you will remember that. I think the circumstances of that case is what I fear are very relevant to this and what we are looking towards. He wasn't a British citizen, but he had the right to residence here, had been for 20 years. And one day he was taken from home. He was campaigning for a Sikh state in Khalistan in India. And he was taken from home here and to be deported. The government's argument was this is on national security grounds and for political reasons. Okay. Now, whenever, fortunately, he was in this country, and fortunately, in those days, I mean, he could travel to Europe, etc., but it wasn't done when he was abroad. It was done when he was here. He managed to get a good set of lawyers, and we did the campaign for him. He was detained for 6 years, waiting for the courts to make a decision. Whenever it went for review, judicial review, the Home Secretary's argument was that the evidence that we have is quite sensitive and we cannot bring it in the court. Okay, and the judge would almost always say, well, we have no reason to doubt that the Home Secretary is not making a rational decision. Okay, so nobody knew what the evidence was, and those were the days when you had that notorious three wise men system. I think I'm sure some of you will know. And I had to. You were not allowed to take a lawyer. You were sitting in front of these three people. It was like a complete sort of Kafka type court where you were not told anything. You were not given any evidence. You had to shoot arrows in the air and think that, well, they may be suspecting because of this, they may be suspecting because of this, and they just kept quiet or maybe asked a question here and there, and that's it. And it was really frightening that these three people, one of them from the Home Office and one from the intelligence services, and the third one I think was a retired lawyer, were sitting there, and you didn't know what you were being implicated of. Anyway, eventually, it went to the European Court of Human Rights. The European Court of Human Rights insisted they want to see at least one piece of evidence on which he's being deported. And the European Court of Human Rights was not impressed by the evidence that was presented. Okay? And of course, then the other thing was he was being sent to a country where there was a death penalty, and they were convinced that he would be given a death penalty. So, the evidence didn't stack up, and he was going to be deported. And the reason was, the political reasons were, the government would not admit it. The Indian government would not admit it either. But in the press, there was enough speculation, and Indian press and us as well, that there was a £2 billion helicopter deal at stake. And India said, you need to send some of the Khalistanis back. Otherwise, we need to, you need to deport them to stop the movement here in UK. Otherwise, no deal. And that was the reason. So now this is where it gets even more extraordinary. The day he was released, he wasn't detained again. If he was really a national security threat, would you allow a person you've categorized as a terrorist to walk the streets of UK? There was no conditions on him. He freely met MPs, and sometimes, there were, the community would invite a minister to the Gurdwara, or he would freely meet them. And the security services here did not feel the necessity to protect their ministers or MPs from him. A person they had designated as a terrorist only a few days before. Okay, and this gets even more extraordinary. He and there's another chap called Harjeet Singh were both together, were both being deported. They've been to India many times since then. Okay, and India has not detained them. What India wanted that time was to make an example of some people, and if they had taken him back as an alleged terrorist, then they would have detained him. We don't know what they would have done with him. But once he was released here, there was no case against him. And he was able to go to India as well, and he's been living a normal life in this country. All right. And that's what we suspect. When you give that much arbitrary power to the political or to the executive, can you feel safe, really? No scrutiny of their decisions, no independent scrutiny of their decisions. Following that that case, and then the special advocates were set up in this country, which has saved many people being deported unnecessarily on merely speculation, or because the British foreign minister or the trade minister wants to improve trade relations with another country. Coming to how does it affect the sovereignty? Well, this may sound a bit far-fetched, but I would have thought, the whole purpose of the Magna Carta was to reduce the absolute power of the ruler and to make it accountable. And although we are not there with this legislation, but it seems instead of making the executive more accountable, we're now taking a step backwards. So at this moment, it might affect Black and ethnic communities. I wonder whether when you establish a principle, where is it going to end? That you can bypass, the legal oversight of a minister's decision. It might affect, as in the Chahal case. In this case, and it happens in every country, really. There's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of thing about, this only deals with terrorists. And surely everybody wants a terrorist to be thrown out of this country. But if Chahal was a terrorist, why is he walking the streets of UK, and why is he able to go back to India? And why was he a terrorist a day before that the decision of the European Court, and why suddenly he's not a terrorist? Okay? Can we really trust the executive to be making those decisions? I think that's a very worrying, I think, trend going backwards in the process of accountability and independent oversight on the decisions of a minister. Yes, a British citizen who, let us say, is caught in India or Tanzania or Sudan or somewhere else, and told that their citizenship has been taken away and they can appeal. But by that time the damage is already done. It's like one of those Western films where you take the person to the desert and say, if you can make it alive, then fine, I won't shoot you, but I won't give you any water. If you can make it alive out of this desert, then fine, you live. I mean, it's just like one of those things, really. I'm talking from a layman's perspective. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. I believe Fahad has something to contribute to what you've just said. Fahad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. I just wanted to add something. You mentioned about Chahal in the 90s, and the most recent SIAC judgment, the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, from I think 2 weeks ago, is a case called Harjeet Singh. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but so Harjeet Singh has been here for decades, and he applied for to naturalize as a citizen, and he was refused on the basis that he was assessed as being involved with the International Sikh Youth Federation, which is a proscribed terrorist organization in this country. And he denied it, and he wasn't shown any evidence. But the problem is that, and it goes back to what you said with Chahal, he's been in this country for decades, and he's accused of being associated with a proscribed terrorist organization, but he's never been arrested or put on trial for that allegation. But at the same time, they use that information to deny him citizenship. And that's quite concerning. What you said is very, very true. How can we trust the Secretary of State? It's not just Priti Patel. I mean, she's a particularly bad Secretary of State, particularly hostile. But I mean, it's a clear pattern through successive Labour and Tory governments. The problem is that the definition to deprive, the test is conducive to the public good, and that there's no statutory definition of that. It's all left to the assessment of the Secretary of State. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court in this country, in Begum, reiterated that she's accountable to Parliament, not us. So we have to, the courts and have to give due respect to the assessment of the Secretary of State, and it's just not tenable, particularly with this current government. I would say that's a general principle. There needs to be more accountability, but we are in this quagmire now where the Supreme Court itself seems to be, in many cases regarding citizenship, finding themselves a bit, let's be polite, they're finding their hands are tied, and there's not much they can do to overturn, even when it comes to children. I mean, there's a recent challenge about the fees to register as a British citizen, and they said, well, it's up to the government. They can charge as much as they want. They have the power to do that. Parliament has given the Secretary that power, so we can't interfere. So it's almost, we have to go back several steps to try to decide, how did we get in this mess in the first place? How is our level of engagement in politics? And maybe that is a starting point, is perhaps we were so disengaged from politics and how things worked in this country that we never questioned legislation. We never challenged it in the way our communities are doing now. Perhaps that was 20 years ago. A lot of this stuff should have been challenged in the last few decades, but it is something to keep an eye on and learn our lessons for going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fahad. And that leads me quite nicely onto my next question, which is, panelists, once again, in your expert opinion, what steps do you believe the UK government or Home Office or Parliament should be taking to ensure that the rights of UK citizens are appropriately safeguarded and protected, whilst ensuring that the legitimate concerns and aims of Clause 9 are fulfilled? And Joe, could I ask you to go first, please?
Yeah. I'm not a great fan of questions like this. I understand why they're asked. I mean, ultimately, what we might want to happen is not the relevant question. The relevant question is what will happen. And I don't myself feel profound optimism about progress on Clause 9. I mean, I think it's somewhere between possible and probable that the House of Lords will push through an amendment to Clause 9. But I think it's very likely indeed that that amendment will be reversed in the Commons. I think that's very troubling, really, for all of the reasons that all of us have outlined. Certainly, Good Law Project has put the word out that when there comes to be the right sort of test case, and you have to choose that test case very, very carefully, we will put together a team to act in that test case to try and inhibit the application of the provisions, which, as I say, I think are profoundly offensive to most people's conception of what citizenship means, as described by Hannah Arendt, that phrase, the right to have rights, and also traditional sort of conceptions of our constitutional right to access to justice. But there are 1,000,001 different ways in which the legislator might make things better. The real question is, will they? And I'm not, I have to tell you, hugely optimistic about the possibility that they will.
Thank you very much, Joe. Farhad, could I ask you to go next, please?
Thank you. I share Joe's pessimism in regard to Clause 9. I feel that it will be passed in one form or the other. What I would like would be for Parliament to adopt Natalie Bennett's amendment, in which she called for a complete repeal of deprivation powers apart from those based on fraudulent, obtaining under fraudulent means. So that's where I would like to see the campaigning going. Whether Clause 9 passes or doesn't, I think what's really important is that campaigners and activists carry on the struggle. Overall, it is very easy to get pessimistic and that there is no hope, especially with the current government, which doesn't look like it's going to be removed from power very soon. But at the same time, when you cast your eye around the world and historically, you see far more horrific situations in other parts of the world, which didn't last forever. Apartheid in South Africa, at its peak, no one could have predicted it would be gone at some point. And likewise, there's so many examples. And oppression has an endpoint, and rendering people stateless and the trajectory we're on at the moment, it's quite infectious. This pattern of calling for people to lose their citizenship. Recently, there's been lots of discussions about dual British-Russian citizens being deprived of their citizenship solely because they possess Russian nationality, and that's really concerning for me, because again, why should any individual, simply because of the actions of a government of which they hold their nationality, suddenly be treated as a suspect, treated as suspicious? And Britain's not even at war at the moment. Russia has invaded Ukraine, but Britain is going to act and talking about penalizing British citizens by revoking their citizenship. It's a very unhealthy period that we're living in. In the United States as well, there was that athlete who made comments in favor of China, and there was calls for her to be stripped of her US citizenship. I think people don't realize that when you strip someone of their citizenship, the human impact. there's been cases of British citizens who've been deprived of their citizenship in foreign jurisdictions, and suddenly, within days of that happening, they've been killed in US drone strikes. They've been kidnapped and renditioned and tortured purely on the basis that they have no state to protect them. It's not a very, there's a lot of just politics and a lot of very unhealthy nationalism suddenly coming to the fore. And I think we're going to have to ride the storm for a while. But ultimately, I think the battle has to continue to push for an end to the deprivation regime in its totality, so that we are all treated as full and equal citizens without that noose hanging around our neck that at any point they can come and pull it, and you're always, under watch, and you never feel as a full citizen, because that's unhealthy for British society in general.
Thank you very much, Farhad. And Dr. Rai, can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, I perhaps have an affliction to being a bit of an optimist, having done a lot of campaigning. I think I do agree with you that given the current state of Parliament, and there is a lot of the environment is very right wing, and it's the I think there's a feeling they say, well, it's not going to affect us, it's affecting them. So them being us, the black and ethnic minorities, Asians. But I think we could at least lobby the House of Lords. Why not ask them to introduce the whole, the special advocate system before the Home Secretary makes a decision, okay? And the process of decision has to be longer, okay? So the Home Secretary, if they are going to make a decision when a person is abroad and taking their citizenship away, but there must be a panel of advocates that they can show the evidence to, and what that will do is it will be the first sort of line of safety in a way. Of course, the best thing would be if it is dropped altogether. And the second thing is we could lobby for a specialized fund and a hot number that when a person is deprived of their citizenship when they're abroad, they should be able to call this number and engage a lawyer and be able to challenge the decision. I think we need to build safeguards in the whole thing. Okay? The safeguards are not there. If the government is going to get away with this, at least we can lobby for safeguards in the whole legislation. But the better thing, I think, is again, I'm more a campaigner, and I can understand your reserved language. I tend to go for a more rhetorical statement that gets to the guts of things. And I would, for instance, if I was leading this campaign, we're not involved in this campaign. We got onto this issue. Most of our work is at the UN. I would go for something like that. Well, this is affecting the black and ethnic communities today, and how do you know it won't affect you? And then, it's giving power to the executive like this. It's a slippery slope, something like that, around that. And try and convince those MPs who think, well, it's not, it's just them, not us, that the them and us eventually comes to the us as well. I mean, that I think it's a campaign tactic more than anything, yeah. But the safeguards need to be put in, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. And thank you very much, panelists. My final question for you, before we move on to the questions from the audience, is, in your expert opinion, what steps should ordinary or non-expert members of our society be taking to get involved in this issue? And Joe, can I please ask you to go first?
I mean, I can see in the comments section that somebody has mentioned a demonstration outside the Home Office on Sunday at midday and a march to Parliament Square. I think it's also worth, if you have an MP, making sure that your MP knows of your opposition and understands why you find the provisions so troubling. I mean, it's very easy to cut and paste a pro forma letter that someone else has written, but it's much more effective if you write and make sure your MP understands, especially if you have a good relationship with them, what it feels like to you to be rendered, in effect, a second-class citizen. You know, some of your MPs will listen, and that can't hurt. I mean, it is difficult. I think all of the ways in which we express opposition to the portfolio of legislation that the government is bringing forward, which are not consistent with the conception that we once had of Britain as a sort of progressive, thoughtful, responsible democracy. All of those ways of expressing opposition are useful, are important. You know, for myself, I've come over the last couple of years to understand how universal is the experience of being an outsider. And I suppose I've found comfort and use in trying to cause communities who are likely to experience this government in similar ways to cohere around their disadvantage. I think that experience of being disadvantaged is universal, and I think it's only if you can cause the interests of those communities to cohere that they'll be able to exercise real political power. I mean, I'm sorry those are very abstract and theoretical answers to the question. I struggle a lot with this, actually, because I don't like telling people that there is not enormous influence that they can exercise. The influence that we have comes in our commonality. It comes in grouping together with others with similar concerns. And, you know, that's not something my bit of the political spectrum is particularly good at doing, I regret to say. So I doubt I have any brilliant pearls of wisdom to offer beyond the other panelists, much more experienced than I am in these matters.
Thank you very much, Joe, and I'm sure we all agree that was extremely insightful and helpful. Fahad, could I ask you the same question?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we all can do is not give up the struggle. It becomes difficult, it becomes weary, we become tired, and there's so many causes out there to be campaigning for. I think people suffer from burnout and disillusionment, and then they move on to the next campaign or whatever is happening. And I think that's something we can't afford to do. But the only way we can keep that candle burning is to ensure that there's more people that take on our roles when we get tired. So there has to be that intergenerational awareness and activism. And I think schools are a great starting point. I think we need to be telling people in schools, and everything for our school governors, we need to bring this in. I know the government have issues with children writing sample lentils to Boris Johnson and being politicized in that way. But I think schools are a fantastic place. Youth groups, community groups, get those children involved, get them understanding. Children understand issues, you might in a simplistic way, but almost in a very pure way that adults are very cynical about. And I think children get it. They get the idea about belonging, identity, equality in a way that adults learn to forget. So I think that's one thing is passing the torch, so to speak, because it's not going to be a short term. It's going to be a long struggle ahead of us. I think secondly is politically, I think what the Sikh Council, and hats off to you guys, are absolutely brilliant. The statement you made that no parliamentarian who votes in favour of this legislation would be given a platform in the Gurdwaras. I think that's brilliant. I wish that the Muslim Council had the courage to make a similar statement, but unfortunately they haven't. Maybe in time they might develop that courage, but I think the stance that you guys have taken is phenomenal. And those type of stances have to be taken, because once they realize that, wait, we were losing out a huge section of the vote and the platform of meeting people who could potentially put us into power, well, they'll have to think twice. So I think that if you can follow through on that and stick to it, I think that's brilliant. And then I think the last thing I could suggest is, again, learning from our mistakes, that we don't follow this whole smoke without fire, and someone deserves to be deprived. I think we need to get away from that, because those are the mistakes that have led to us where we are today. And that's sort of a wider principle, whether it's Guantanamo Bay or the Prevent program. Now Jodie Foster is making Hollywood movies about it, but 15, 20 years ago when we were campaigning about it, we were deemed to be toxic, and you shouldn't associate with those people because they're aligned with or associated with Al-Qaeda or whatever. So I think we need to drop that kind of prejudice, essentially, and look at the principle of the matter. What's the principle? Deprivation now has been rolled out from terror suspects to pedophiles. So the Rochdale grooming gang, which I'm sure no one has any sympathy with, they were deprived of their citizenship. And, again, they've been punished, they've gone to prison, but do they then need to be deprived of their citizenship again? Why? Because they're in what they not conducive. They said they're involved in serious organized crime. Again, people aren't gonna come out campaigning with placards for them, and I understand why. But the principle is, had they been white, it wouldn't have happened to them. And that's the difference. Why should, if there was a white member of that gang, and many of these gangs have white people involved in them, why do they finish their sentence and get to carry on with their lives, but the brown people are deprived of their citizenship and then deported? Because if we extend this where it's going, if you recall pre-pandemic, just before the pandemic hit, we had a huge media hype and hysteria about knife crime in London. Knife crime carried out by black gangs, Jamaican gangs, Bengali gangs, Afghan gangs, whatever you call them, whatever they call them, these racialized criminal gangs. Now, that is serious organized crime. All it takes is for that hysteria to come to a level where they start talking about taking away their citizenship. And people like Priti Patel, she would do it without even blinking her eyes. She will sign that away. Not a problem. Set a precedent. If the public isn't going to actually come out and support them because of the hysteria against them, on the principle alone, they will find the most gruesome, horrific knife attack, right? Not your normal one that you'll see on the streets and read about in the paper, but the worst one they can find. And they will make a lesson of that person as a warning to the rest of us. But once it's happened, it's there, it's a precedent. And it's this sort of mission creep. The policy of non-conducive to the public good, as it's defined under the Home Secretary's policy, extends to what she describes as unacceptable behaviors. I mean, what is an unacceptable behavior? Is it the fact that you don't use a knife and fork when you eat? How broad is this? So I think we have to learn the lessons from the past and not repeat them. And showing solidarity on a principle in no way means that you support the criminal and abhorrent actions of individuals who are targeted by this legislation. We have to look at the principle itself and the society, the kind of society that we wish to live in, one where there is due process and the rule of law and equal citizenship.
Thank you very much, Fahad. That was extremely interesting. Some of you may notice that Joe Moreham has been called away. Unfortunately, owing to he's got some competing professional commitments this evening, so I do apologise for that. But moving on, Jazdev, could I put the same question to you? And just as a reminder to our audience, the question is, what steps can ordinary or non-expert members of our society do or should be taking to get involved in the issue at hand? The floor is yours.
Okay, I think a campaign like this has to be multifaceted. Okay, um, in this um, in this environment or age of cultural wars, we need to be able to cross them and go to the other side and convince them as well. Okay, that's the important thing. To get the majority on our side as well and say, look, this is you might think this is just affecting some people at the moment, but this is a dangerous precedence which will come for you as well. They'll come for you as well at some stage. Other than that, I think if most of the organizations come together and campaign, it is possible. And then, well, if all fails, then we obviously have to get some legal cases in the future. But that's a long run. But I think in the first instance, I think we have to look at how do we get the majority community to understand what is going on. Just telling them about the second-class citizenship may not interest a lot of people because there is a I mean, for want of a better word, there's sort of a latent racism going on in this country at this stage. I think the best thing would be, I think to get the majority community on the side, we have to look at the principles and see how dangerous they are. Giving arbitrary power to the executive is a slippery slope. That I think is it would be one of the major winners in this. Well, not winners, but one way of influencing MPs and lords and the majority community. And of course, then every other community all other communities have to campaign on the two-tier citizenship thing as well. It affects people who are in mixed marriages. If you married a white person is married somebody from the Asian or black community, and the Asian or black person is quite vocal in criticizing the government or another government where Britain wants to improve its relationship. What then? So there's. I think we have to look at the various groups that can be affected and how this could be a dangerous thing in the future. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. We're now going to open up the floor and invite questions from our audience. And in order to do so, my colleague, Miss Bethan Walters, will take the floor. So, Bethan, over to you.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you so much, speakers. I think it's incredible how you've kind of worded and answered these questions, and hopefully people will understand the consequences of Clause 9 a bit better. A lot of people have asked kind of nearer the beginning and during this if one of the speakers, Fahad, might be kind of best for this if he hasn't just disappeared. If you could kind of define actually what dual citizenship is or looks like, who will be at risk under this Nationality and Borders Bill, kind of what British citizens actually are at risk in terms of losing their citizenship if they did unacceptable behaviour or whatever. Is Fahad there?
I believe his laptop was about to die, so he's just popped off to get the charger. Maybe put Jazdev, if you have any thoughts around the question.
You're on mute.
Sorry, can you ask the question again?
Yeah, if you could define, who is at risk of this, so, or at least Fahad, maybe if you want to answer. A lot of people are asking kind of who comes under this dual citizenship, what it looks like for a British citizen. Is it that their parents were born somewhere else? Is it that they were born somewhere else? Is it that they have, a passport for the two countries? What kind of is the definition of that?
Well, the way I see it is that if they can say that you have the right to get a citizenship in another country, then they can deprive you of your citizenship if they feel that you are a nuisance in this country or a terrorist, etc. And there are countries, the countries I know, where if your parents were born there or your grandparents were born there, then you have a right to get citizenship of that country. So the way I interpret it, but Fahad can explain better. The way I understand is that if your parents or grandparents were born in another country and that country has a provision to give you citizenship, even though you're not a citizen of that country, then your British citizenship can be removed if you're considered a threat here or whatever the government wants to deprive your citizenship from. I don't know.
Thank you. Fahad, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think if you take two types of British citizens, those who are born British and those who naturalize after coming to the UK. So those who are born British, they can only be deprived of their citizenship if they already have another citizenship. Not that they might be entitled to one, but they already have one. Now, many people may have a second citizenship, but they're not aware of it due to their ancestral heritage. They could have, their parents could automatically pass on that citizenship. In the recent cases, the Bangladeshi cases that we dealt with, the Bangladeshi law means that if your child is born British and Bangladeshi, he will automatically inherit Bangladeshi citizenship up until the age of 21, and then it lapses. Pakistan, for example, is a different state. In Pakistan, if you are born to a Pakistani parent anywhere in the world, you are a Pakistani citizen automatically, and that doesn't lapse. So if you're in those categories, they can deprive you only if you have a second nationality. There might be some countries now, and again, I could be wrong, but I believe India has this law that if you're a born British citizen, you can't be British and Indian. You only are a British citizen, and I could be wrong about this. But in those scenarios, you can't be deprived of your citizenship. And I say this with a little bit of confidence because I know of cases where people who are of Indian origin who were in Syria were not deprived of their citizenship like other people in the same group, but they were allowed to come back under a different regime called temporary exclusion orders. And I believe the reason was because they realized that they didn't have Indian citizenship. Now, that's one category. The naturalized citizens, on the other hand, British-born citizens, if you only have one citizenship, they cannot deprive you because it would leave you stateless. So that's the reason they couldn't deprive people from who have Indian origin heritage. On the flip side, if you have a naturalized citizen, then they can deprive you in certain circumstances, even if it leaves you stateless, on the basis that you are entitled to get another citizenship. So if somebody comes to the UK, let's say from India, and they naturalize and they become British, and then the government decides that it's conducive to the public good because, and the test is, they have they've engaged in conduct seriously prejudicial to the vital interests of the UK, and on that basis, we're going to take away their citizenship. And they'll say, yes, but I don't have Indian citizenship anymore, I've lost it. They say, well, you can apply for it again. So they can do it and leave you stateless in those situations. So naturalized citizens have even less, there's a lower category of entitlement there.
Thank you. That was very clear. If anyone does have any questions, do pop it in the chat box or raise your hand, etc. If you'd like to ask them. Just give it a moment. someone has mentioned about a petition. So if there's a link to that, if you could pop it in the chat box, I'm sure people would love to sign it. But otherwise, if you come across maybe a lot of common questions through civil societies, through social media, where again, there is almost this kind of basic or lack of basic understanding of actually what Clause 9 from the Nationality Borders Bill could actually impact people. So in terms of kind of them being abroad at the time of when they are handed this notice, etc., that you might want to address if people are kind of still having those questions.
Is that to me?
Yeah, or
I think someone got their hand up.
Yeah, I think you're off mute. Would you like to ask a question?
Is that for me? Look, I just want to say a great thank you to each and every one of you, because to be honest, I didn't realize until I attended this session as to how big this issue is and how widely it impacts people from all over the world. So thank you so much for that. And I mean, I'm trying to work out, clearly there have been some messages about what we can do in terms of right to our MPs and all sorts of things, but I feel like I like to do more. And I'm not sure what that is really, okay? So thank you to the panel. Thank you for organising this event. And we need to get this message out to the wider community. And I don't know how we do that as well, because I'll certainly be talking to my community, my friends, my relatives, and so on, to make them aware of the impact of this. The vast majority of the people are not aware of Clause 9. That's a message that I don't know whether I suspect you're already aware of this, and that's why you've organised this event. So thank you.
Thank you for your question. Fahad, did you want to add anything to that or comment?
Yeah, I think Sabir, thank you for attending. It's heartening just to hear that you weren't aware before, but you are now, and you want to do something. And that's a common feeling that we're getting when people learn about this. And I would say that it's really important that people that you know, that you inform them. And if you're able to organize even like a Zoom meeting with your contacts in your community, I'm sure the Sikh Human Rights Organization and the Sikh Council, they can all help that as well, get speakers. And I think this public awareness is really important, because as I said, the fear is that people who are campaigning will burn out, and then no one is there to take up the mantle. So the younger generation, they will have all sorts of different ideas. They'll know how to use the technology that I'm just too old for. So even when it came to, I remember last year when the whole issue was happening in Palestine, and traditionally you do a talk and everything else, and then my daughter showed me a TikTok video, and it was a 60-second little ballad or like a song that this and she summarized like the history of that conflict in 60 seconds in a very, very catchy way. And it went viral. And I said, wow, that, me droning on and on about something, people don't listen. But that thing went viral so quickly, and just, you saw the reaction among school kids when they saw that. And I think citizenship is it's not a very, in topic, funny topic, or, like a funky topic with kids. But somehow we need to tap into that generation and explain what's happening. They will then take this up, and they will come up with all sorts of, very, very innovative ways to spread the message. And I think that's why it's really important that we educate them about what's happening.
Just final thing, I think the fact that you actually made me realise that impacts me and my children. I thought I was quite safe because although I was born in India, I've got British passport, so I thought it was quite safe. But you've changed all that, not only for me, but for my children. So the impact is very considerable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We got a question?
Shall I add on? I think if you want to campaign within the Sikh community, I think the Chahal case is a very powerful one. Although he wasn't a citizenship, it was the way the decision was made, as I reiterate. When he was in detention, until that day, the British government said he's a terrorist. And when the case went to European court and they said, well, the evidence is, we're not impressed by the evidence. 1 minute past that decision, he wasn't a terrorist. Yeah? And the only crime, he didn't commit a crime. It was because he was campaigning for something that he believed in, which he thought he believed in the rights he had in this country. Okay, he was campaigning for a separate Sikh state. Well, that's everybody's right in this country. You can freedom of expression, and because he was causing issues to another country, he was being deported. Right? It's the arbitrary way of making a decision without any checks and balances. I think that's a fearful thing. If we can get that, I'm sure young people can get that into the Twitter and etc. in a far better way than I have explained. That case, the community can empathize with, even if it is quite old. Yeah, and I think we there are many other ways we can other campaigns that are going on. I think we should be supporting them.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, I believe there's one more question. You ready?
Hi, could I just have a moment, if that's okay? Hi, it's Ahmed Hassan Desi from Sikh Council UK. So members of the Sikh community, we're kind of, let's say there are genuine concerns due to the Home Secretary, these powers just lasting with one person. There's no due process, it doesn't go via courts. You're not given the information or what charges you are being kind of detained on. So secret courts where you can't actually see the evidence, or you don't know what you're actually going to be arguing. And quite recently in October, there was the case of the West Midlands 3, where 3 individuals were, while an extradition order was actually signed off by the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. And at the time, India couldn't actually produce the evidence. Now, within the Sikh community, many are concerned that she doesn't need to produce any evidence now. Their citizenship, let's say if they were to go abroad or even here, it could be revoked due to diplomacy, diplomatic relations. And that's a concern because now India couldn't provide any evidence at the time, but now they could be abroad or even here. They don't need to be notified. They don't need 28 days for them to appeal it, and they could just be stripped. Another example current is of Jagtar Singh Johar, who is actually in India. And due to whenever, let's say, an Indian diplomat comes over here, members of this house or the parliament, kind of parliamentarians, mention to them Jagtar's case, or they claim to mention his case. But that is affecting diplomatic relations. Now, as part of Clause 9, is the state, if anything affects diplomatic relations, that could be a reason for someone's citizenship to be removed as well. So, I mean, those are just 2 cases within the Sikh community, but on a wider scale, obviously, like Fahad has mentioned, removal of citizenship is something that's gone from let's say from the 1981 Nationality Act. However, it was changed in 2002, 2003 due to the Abu Hamza case. But this is something that if someone has committed a crime, they need to go via the courts. And it's for a judge, jury to kind of see what the sentencing is, rather than their citizenship being revoked and them being, let's say, shipped off to another country where perhaps they've never even visited, where they've just got some form of ancestry. So, I mean, the issue isn't just Clause 9, it's the whole process of removing someone's citizenship, and it will only affect those who are, let's say, non-white ethnic backgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fahad, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, not really. I think Amritpal really summed it up very, very well. The issue goes back to one of the rule of law and due process. If somebody is assessed to be a criminal, well, we boast about the British criminal justice system as being one of the best and longest established in the world. Why don't we trust it? You know, my client just came back from Bangladesh after being deprived for 5 years of his citizenship, and we eventually won the appeal, and he got his citizenship back, and he returned. And I assumed I had a lawyer lined up for him, a criminal defense lawyer, to meet him at the airport, and he wasn't even arrested. He was let go home, and he still hasn't been arrested. And I'm baffled. And we're thinking, well, 5 years of a man's life and his family life just destroyed. Now, you're telling me that this man who was deemed such a dangerous terrorist that you had to leave him in exile for 5 years. Now you're not even interested that you're going to even arrest him, to ask him questions. It's baffling. And he's the second such client of mine who's come back in those circumstances. So it is this thing, is that if there's evidence. Now you mentioned some cases, and it's really important because you can only bring a case to court if you've actually got evidence. But what you can deprive someone is on intelligence. So maybe India didn't produce evidence because they didn't have the evidence to seek an extradition. But as you mentioned, intelligence could be shared and used to further diplomatic relations and in order to keep someone in exile, deprive them of their citizenship, and persecute them. And as has been mentioned, you can appeal, but it's done at that point. One of the huge problems clients face is even getting legal aid. Because you can imagine you're stuck in a foreign country, then you have to prove the legal aid regulation is so stringent on proving that you're entitled to legal aid. Some people have been working and have been paying taxes, and as a result, they've got quite some substantial savings, maybe 10, 15,000, which puts them outside of the realm of legal aid. So then they have to exhaust those funds, which are used very quickly in a legal case like this, until they're penniless. And then they're entitled to legal aid in a case which they're really up against it and very hard to win. So you're bankrupting people, you're leaving them in exile, money they could be using for their upkeep while they're stuck in a third country, or they're using on legal fees. There's no automatic entitlement to legal aid, as you would have if in a criminal case, you're automatically entitled to legal aid. So in a criminal case, if someone is convicted of the worst atrocity, a judge cannot pass a sentence to deprive them of their citizenship. Bear that in mind. So someone could, those who carried out or involved in the 7/7 attacks, the 52 people killed in a terrorist attack, people who causing huge massacres, cannot lose their citizenship. Okay, just bear that in mind. Yet somebody who is assessed to be a threat to national security without any evidence of ever going to court can lose his citizenship. It's baffling. It just makes no sense whatsoever that the Secretary of State has this type of executive power where she can become judge, jury, and in many cases executioner of these individuals.
Thank you. That was excellently put, actually. Justin, did you want to add anything? And then we can pass to Carlos. You're on mute.
I think we've dealt with a number of cases, and it's coming through that the few cases in which the government has taken actions like this, when the government has lost, not lost, when they've gone through the courts, suddenly those people are not terrorists anymore. There's no grounds for having taken their citizenship or having deprived them of the right to come back here, or the right, or even making a decision on deportation, as even the Coventry, the Birmingham 3-6. I think that it's. I think what we need to hit home is the arbitrary way in which the executive is being allowed. Well, the power that is being given to the executive to make arbitrary decisions. Okay? And it subverts the rule of law in this country, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jazdev. I'll pass over to Carlos now, but thank you very much for everyone's questions.
Thank you very much, Bethan. Unfortunately, we've run over our slightly allocated time, so I do apologise for that. Just to conclude, I'd like to thank you, Fahad and Jazdev, for being here today and taking the time out of what I'm aware is extremely busy schedules. Just lastly, before we conclude, I believe Joe mentioned earlier that there will be a protest that's been organised by a collection of NGOs and other civil society actors this coming Sunday, which is Sunday the 27th of February. The planned demonstration is from the Home Office, to meet at the Home Office at midday. The postcode for the Home Office is SW1P4DF. From there, they'll march on Parliament Square. It will be a great opportunity for those who are wishing to get more involved in this issue to meet like-minded organisations, individuals, individuals, also to obviously discuss the wider implications of the bill. And I'll leave it at that. So yeah, just to conclude everything, for more information about today's speakers and the Sikh Human Rights Group, please visit our website, which is www.shrg.net, or visit our social media accounts at shrg_NGO. Once again, panelists, thank you so much for your time, and that concludes today's event.
Thank you.